Rabiu Kwankwaso has just made a powerful appeal to Nigerians ahead of the 2027 election. Reject divisive politics, demand competent leadership, demand accountability, and most importantly, look beyond region, religion, and personal ambition. But there is something interesting about this message, because in Nigerian politics, saying let us unite is one thing. Actually building a political coalition that can cross Nigerians' deepest political and regional divisions is something completely different. And that may be the retest facing the Obi-Kwankwaso ticket in 2027. So today, let's look beyond the headlines and ask a bigger question. Can this partnership actually turn the desire for change into a national political movement? Because Nigerians' political history tells us that winning an election is rarely just about having popular candidates. It's about building bridges, and sometimes those bridges are much harder to build than they look. Kwankwaso's latest statement comes as the 2027 presidential campaign begins. His message is built around issues that ordinary Nigerians understand immediately: food prices, unemployment, the rising cost of doing business, insecurity, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and accountability in government. In other words, Kwankwaso is trying to frame the 2027 election around something broader than personalities. He is presenting it as a choice about the direction of the country. And then comes perhaps the most politically important part of this message. He says his partnership with Peter Obi is not about region, religion, or personal ambition. It is about Nigeria. That statement matters because the Obi-Kwankwaso ticket brings together two politicians whose political bases have historically been associated with very different parts of the country, and that creates both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is obvious. A partnership that crosses regional boundaries can potentially appeal to voters who are tired of the traditional political divisions. But the challenge is even more obvious. Will voters see the partnerships as genuinely national or simply another electoral calculations? To understand the significance of this ticket, we have to take a step back. Nigerians' elections have repeatedly been influenced by regional identity, religion, ethnicity, political loyalty, and strength of local political structures. These factors don't necessarily determine every voter's decision, but they matter, and political parties know they matter. That is why Nigerian presidential elections are often more complicated than simply asking, who is the most popular candidate? The real question is, where is that popularity located? A candidate can be extremely popular in one part of Nigeria and still struggle nationally. And that is one of the central problems every opposition coalition faces. You need enthusiasm, you need organization, you need votes, but you also need geographical spread. That is where Peter Obi and Kwankwaso partnership becomes particularly interesting, because it potentially connects two different political constituencies. Peter Obi demonstrated significant support among younger and urban voters, particularly in part of southern Nigeria during the 2023 election. Kwankwaso, meanwhile, has a powerful political identity in Kano and the wider northern political environment. So the strategic question becomes, can those two bases complement each other? Or will their supporters remain largely concentrated within their traditional political territories? That is the difference between a political partnership and a genuinely national coalition. There is another factor that cannot be ignored. Nigeria's political mood has changed significantly since the 2023 election. The cost of living has become a major political issue. Many families are under pressure. Young Nigerians are concerned about jobs and opportunity. Businesses are dealing with high operating costs. and insecurity continues to affect communities across different parts of the country. These issues create something politicians desperately want: a common grievance. The problem is that a common grievance does not automatically produce a common political choice. Nigerians can agree that things need to improve and still disagree completely about who should lead that change. That is why Kwankwaso's message about rejecting divisive politics is strategically important. He is essentially asking voters to move from "where are you from" to "what can this government actually deliver?" That is the powerful political argument, and whether voters accept it will depend on what happens next. Let's look at the political mathematics. Peter Obi brings a political brand built heavily around competence, accountability, and political change. Kwankwaso brings something different: a strong northern political identity, particularly in Kano, combined with an established political network. Put those two together and you potentially have something neither candidate could easily create alone: a broader geographical footprint. But here's the catch: political coalitions don't work simply because politicians sign agreements. The supporters have to accept the coalition too, and that is where things become complicated. Can an Obi supporter in the South enthusiastically campaign for Kwankwaso? Can a Kwankwaso supporter in the North enthusiastically campaign for Obi? Can both groups see the ticket as something bigger than the individual candidates? Those are not minor questions. They may determine whether the partnership becomes a serious national force or simply another interesting alliance in Nigeria's crowded opposition landscape. There is a very important historical lesson here. Nigeria has seen opposition politicians come together before, and sometimes those alliances have completely changed the political landscape. The most obvious modern example was the coalition that eventually produced the All Progressive Congress and defeated the incumbent People's Democratic Party in 2015. The lesson was simple: when political forces that are individually weaker combine effectively, the result can be much greater than the sum of the parts. But there is another lesson: coalitions are difficult to maintain. Different politicians have different ambitions. Different regions have different expectations. Different political structures have different interests. And once the election is over, those differences do not magically disappear. That means the Obi-Kwankwaso partnerships has two texts. The first is electoral. Can it win enough votes across Nigeria? The second is political. Can it convince Nigeria that the partnership represents a genuine national project rather than a temporary arrangement designed to win an election? The biggest question: can they translate hunger into votes? This may ultimately be the most important question of 2027. Nigeria has millions of people who are unhappy with the country's direction. But political dissatisfaction is not the same thing as electoral organization. People may complain about the economy, they may complain about insecurity, they may demand better leadership, but elections are won through actual votes. That requires mobilization, pooling unit structures, local political network, strong candidates, funding, messaging, and the ability to persuade voters outside one's traditional base. So when Kwankwaso asks Nigerians to reject divisive politics, the real challenge is not the speech. The challenge is what happens after the speech. Can this message reach the farmer, the market trader, the student, the small business owner, the civil servant, the young person looking for employment? And perhaps most importantly, can it persuade voters who have never previously considered supporting either candidate? This is where the 2027 battle could become very interesting. So what could go wrong? There are also serious obstacles. First, regional expectation. Every major political alliance in Nigeria eventually has to answer the question of who benefits and who gets what. Second, voters' trust. Some voters may welcome the alliance, others may question the motivations behind it. Third, opposition fragmentation. The Obi-Kwankwaso ticket is not operating in an empty political field. Other opposition figures and political movements are also seeking influence. If opposition votes becomes divided among several strong candidates, the mathematics changes dramatically. And fourth, there is the biggest challenge of all, turning a coalition of politicians into a coalition of voters. This is much harder. Politicians can negotiate. Voters cannot be negotiated into supporting a ticket. They have to be convinced. What does Kwankwaso's message really mean? Perhaps the most interesting part of Kwankwaso's statement is not the criticism of Nigerians' problem. Almost every major politician will make similar argument during an election. The more important message is the attempt to redefine what the 2027 election should be about. Not North versus South, not Muslims versus Christian, not one ethnic group against another, but competence, accountability, security, opportunity, and the future of the country. This is a powerful political narrative, but Nigerians have heard powerful narrative before. The real question is whether this one can survive the realities of Nigeria electoral politics, because campaigns are easy when everyone is talking about unity. The real test comes when candidates have to compete for actual votes. So, can Obi and Kwankwaso unite Nigeria? The honest answer is, we don't know yet. But we do know what they have to prove. They have to demonstrate that their partnership is bigger than the individual political ambitions. They have to persuade voters that the alliance crosses regional and religious boundary. They have to build a structure capable of converting popularity into votes. They have to convince Nigerians that this is not simply another electoral arrangement that will disappear after election day. Because Nigerians' political history has already shown us something important. Coalitions can win elections, but only genuine political movement can sustain the trust required to transform a country. And that brings us back to Kwankwaso's own message. Reject divisive politics, demand competence, demand accountability, and put Nigeria first. Whether Nigerians ultimately believe that Obi-Kwankwaso ticket represents that new direction will not be decided by the campaign statement. It will be decided by millions of voters. And that is why the real story of the 2027 elections may not simply be who will win. It may be, can Nigerian opposition finally build a coalition broad enough to overcome the divisions that have shaped its politics for decades? That is the question we will be watching. This is the Pivot Report, where today's headlines meet history. Let me thank you specially for staying glued to the end of this video. I'll see you in the next video.